laboratory. A home away from home and lifeline to the refuge field camps for scientists from around the world. Leaving the security of the ship, biologists disembark to isolated wild islands. Their mission: to study and restore wildlife, to monitor population cycles in species and be watchful of those at risk, to learn more about the habitats that support wildlife, and to ensure that the biological diversity and abundance of the refuge endure.
We get to see aboard the ship some of the harshest ocean conditions of any oceans in the world, where the Pacific meets the Bering Sea along the Aleutian chain and creates some of the most violent waters in the world. We see winds gusting to 100+ knots. We see sea and sea state conditions reaching 35 foot, and on a 120-foot vessel, they're ominous.
Weather reports, which can change from hour to hour, might call for gale force winds, swirling fog, blizzards, and cyclonic storms.
We're the only vessel for many, many miles, so you have to be very careful, and safety is the utmost concern when you're transiting these dangerous waters and these remote waters.
Wildlife adapts to the weather, and so do the scientists.
Since the Maritime Refuge contains areas that are very isolated, and many of the areas are in this zone where weather is extreme. Our crews are isolated for the summer, May to September, in these various locations, so we take a lot of time to think about ways to improve their margins of safety.
The islands and headlands are a spectacle of seabirds. More than 40 million seabirds of 30 different species nest on the refuge. Millions more visit here. There are more seabirds on the refuge than all the seabirds in the rest of North America. Just one colony on one island can be home to over 1 million birds and include 20 or more species. It's been said that sailors long ago listened for the clamor of bird calls to recognize headlands in the thick fog.
It looks like a beehive. I mean, there's tens of thousands flying all over the place. It's just a loud place and a really amazing concentration of birds in the air and on the water.
Such vast numbers are a sign that the waters of the North Pacific and Bering Sea are a rich soup, thriving with fish and plankton to feed on. The Tekla is headed out to field camps and annual study sites, where refuge biologists monitor marine mammals and seabirds like the kittiwakes and murres on St. George in the Pribilof Islands.
Red-legged kittiwakes are found throughout the Bering Sea and nowhere else in the world. Over 90% of the world's population nest on the Alaska Maritime Refuge. This is fortunate because the refuge can offer protection to this species. Reds and black-legged kittiwakes will nest in the same proximity to each other, often in clusters on the cliff faces.
On St. George Island, refuge biologists work atop dramatic 1,000-foot-high cliffs that hold multitudes of nesting birds.
Murres are very colonial seabird. They nest in very dense numbers. They tend to come back to the same site once they've nested year after year after year. They keep the same mate. They only lay a single egg and raise a single chicken in a season. St. George is the largest mer colony in Alaska. There are probably 2 million mers nesting there in huge, huge numbers. Ledges that go on for miles that have tens of thousands of mers on them.
As the Tekla sails between islands, unexpected sights astonish even those with years of experience in the refuge.
All of a sudden, all these birds appear, and for the next 30 miles, we see millions of shearwaters.
The phenomenon of shearwaters coming all the way from New Zealand and Australia, where they breed. They literally form flocks that you can see on the ship's radar. And sometimes, if you get into the big concentrations, you can basically see them almost all the way to the horizon.
Far out the Aleutian chain is Kiska Island, where a field camp is summer home for scientists researching auklets.
The display of auklets at Kiska is truly unbelievable. They come in such incredible numbers, this mass of these huge ribbons of birds flying in from the horizon to over your head and beyond. They darken the sky, and beats of their wings and their calls is kind of a deafening sound. It's really kind of a spectacle in some ways. Must have been like the passenger pigeons or the great herds of buffalo that are now gone. We have just the wildest guesses at populations in most cases. Some estimates run from the million to 15 million at one single location. The most abundant is the least auklet, and there's certainly millions and millions of those. Crested are the next most abundant. Crested auklets have this sort of tangerine odor about them, which is kind of overpowering at Kiska because their numbers are so vast. Parakeet and whiskered are probably the most unique. They nest almost exclusively on refuge lands in Alaska.
In the islands of the Four Mountains, Chaguluk rises ominously from the sea. There, U.S. Geological Survey biologists study one of the largest fulmar colonies in the world.
There aren't any other species in our Alaska seabird assemblage that are quite like fulmars, and you have to come to some pretty special places like Chaguluk to have any chance to see them or to work with them. This particular study, we're doing satellite telemetry and also some genetic work that we'll do back in the lab. The purpose is to determine which fulmars are being caught in long-line fisheries. So that's very serious for a very long-lived species. These birds live for up to 40, 50 years naturally. We're putting satellite transmitters on the birds with harnesses. These are solar-powered units, which if we're lucky, we could get data for the next 3 years. We're pursuing it fairly aggressively because we get just crucial information that, we've never had access to. Where do these birds go seasonally? Because that's a crucial management question.
The vast ocean reaches that separate islands can also separate populations of the same species for countless generations.
We have a number of unique subspecies. They're isolated so long that they're just different. For instance, I think we've got 5 or 6 different recognized subspecies of ptarmigan scattered along the Alaska Peninsula islands and out through the Aleutians. The Aleutian green-winged teal, it's a teal that's a lot like the North American green-winged teal, but it has as its habits that it nests on scattered islands through the Aleutians, and that's the only place that it occurs.
In Unimak Pass, the Tekla drops anchor at Iktak, where rich ocean waters support dense colonies of tufted puffins.
Iktak provides nesting sites for a whole suite of marine animals. The most common bird is tufted puffin. We estimate about 100,000 nesting here at Ictac. And you might see thousands, maybe 10,000 swirling around over Ictac, and there might be thousands in the water right offshore at the same time, these big rafts floating around on the sea.
Ictac is also home to the tufted puffin's cousin, the horned puffin, which nest in notches in the rocks.
Bird, egg, chamber.
On the Aleutian island of Ulac, highly trained researchers conduct a survey of burrow nesting birds, where they must employ the most obvious technique, gently reaching into the burrow to see what's living there. Like a Cassin's auklet or a fork-tailed storm petrel. Storm petrels are also found on St. Lazaria Island in the southeastern reaches of the refuge, in habitat far different from the treeless tundra of the Aleutians.
Storm petrels are burrow nesters, and they're able to survive here because the soil is loose enough for these tiny birds to be digging burrows into the soil. The storm petrel burrows are pretty tiny. We have 2 or 3 people who are looking for burrow entrances, and once they find one, they give it an individual number, and then they reach in to see if there's a storm petrel occupying that burrow. And if there is, then we note which species it is and if it might have an egg or a chick.
Hey. It's only about a week old at the most.
Yeah. One of the reasons for having burrows is so that they can avoid predators such as crows, eagles, peregrine falcons. They also return to the islands just at night to help avoid predation. We collect data during the night as well because that's when the adults are most active in returning to the island or going out to sea to feed. And what we're doing then is netting some of the birds in what's called a mist net. The bird will hit the net and then it slides down into this little pocket so that it's held gently. And then the researcher can go and remove the bird from the net and then collect the diet sample because these birds usually regurgitate their stomach contents. We collect diet samples so that we can see what prey is available to these birds out in the ocean and sampling to see what foods they're bringing back for their chicks.
The Tekla is a floating field research site. Using hydroacoustic sonar, sampling, and monitoring techniques, biologists study the marine food web. They discover critical feeding areas, sample the undersea food base, and record the changing ocean environment. Bogoslav. This active volcano was first seen as it rose from a fiery underwater eruption 2 centuries ago. Although a young island, seabirds and mammals moved in and multiplied to incredible densities. Until recently, when the sea lions mysteriously began to disappear from Bogoslav and throughout most of the refuge.
Stellar sea lions have declined by about 80%, and that's happened in about the last 20 years. So they are now classified as an endangered species because of that serious population decline. There's a lot of research going on, and I think it's fair to say that there's not agreement on exactly what the cause of decline